Bante Van Rakita Samanera. So I am making a video here, continuing in this series, working through some work that I did on communication skills. It's behavioral psychology related to the Dharma. It is about stress and the reasons that stressful situations come about, in this case quarrels and divisions, conflict, and all the alienation and stress that goes with it. This are currently going through the section which is on gender inflamed communication. Well, it's about inflammatory communication, provocative communication. In this case, we're taking on gender oriented stuff, but it can apply to anything really. Okay, so as you'll see, we'll work through this next block where they have a main umbrella topic and then 3 examples of it playing out, where we see unhealthy critique, toxic response, and a healthier version. In this case, the conversation critiques monastic or spiritual roles in gender contexts, not uncommon. And a critique that comes out, and if it's in this sort of red color, it's unhealthy. If it's in the lime green color, healthier. Isn't it hypocritical for monastic traditions to claim moral authority while refusing to ordain women equally? It's a fair point, but the way that it's said we'll come back to. Toxic response. You clearly don't understand how monastic systems actually work. Maybe educate yourself first. These were generated, by the way. This is not my opinion. These were just generated. It's an example of a toxic response. Let's go back to see why the first one is unhealthy. Isn't it hypocritical for monastic traditions to claim moral authority while refusing to ordain women equally? It's a rhetorical question. It's basically making a statement of an opinion. It's hypocritical for blah, blah, blah. This statement challenges the perceived inconsistency in spiritual systems regarding gender equality. Let's have a look. And the toxic response to that, it's defensive, it's condescending, and invalidating. You clearly don't understand how monastic systems actually work. Maybe educate yourself first. So it's patronizing, condescending, and invalidating. Whatever was said is all batted away and squished. It's invalid. Condescending, it's talking right down to someone. I know more than you. And it's defensive. So this response dismisses the critique and positions the speaker, the answerer, responder, as the authority, creating a barrier to any dialogue and escalating defensiveness on the first person's part. So a healthy response to this could be this. So let's hear it again. Isn't it hypocritical for monastic traditions to claim moral authority while refusing to ordain women equally? That's an important point. So it's immediately validating and acknowledging. That's an important point. Monastic traditions do face challenges in balancing their heritage with evolving expectations. What changes do you think are most needed? So again, it shows empathy. It's sensitive to the feelings of the person speaking, and it invites a collaboration. What changes do you think are most needed? Let's have your input. So empathy and collaborative inquiry. So it's a question. We're inquiring. Go ahead. Open up. Share. Let's see what you've got to say. I'd be interested to hear. Maybe we can make something active. So it's kind of constructive and forward-looking. All right. So let's go ahead with this one. I'm just going to ask my AI to chip in or be a bit of a sounding board. Hi, could you be a sounding board on the side while I'm reading out some of the unhealthy and healthy to and fro's, the critiques and the responses and the healthy ones? I really don't want you to go rambling off. I just want you to be able to give it a kind of occasional aha and, you know, round up a little bit here and there, but mainly be a listening and sounding board while I'm reading it out. Is that okay? I'm not even sure it's going to work. All right. Let's move on to the next one and have a look at our toxic critique and response.
Yes, absolutely, I can do that. I'll be a quiet, supportive presence, chiming in when it feels natural or helpful, but letting you take the lead as you read out the critiques and responses. Just let me know when you're ready to begin.
Toxic critique. Don't you think that spiritual practices like yours uphold outdated patriarchal norms that limit progress for women? That's the toxic critique. And the toxic response could be something like this as an example. Oh, so now spiritual traditions are to blame for everything wrong with gender dynamics. So we have these two, toxic meets toxic, or unhealthy meets toxic. In the first place, don't you think that spiritual practices like yours uphold outdated patriarchal norms that limit progress for women? This critique questions the alignment of spiritual traditions with modern societal values, provocatively faulty speech. It makes broad assumptions, sweeping statements, conflates individual choice with systemic norms, and shuts down meaningful dialogue. Whereas the sarcastic toxic response, so now spiritual traditions are to blame for everything wrong with gender dynamics. The entire everything, whole baby and bathwater. This sarcastic remark invalidates the other person's perspective and shifts the tone to confrontational, discouraging further discussion, and results in conflict. It's defensive, it has a dismissive tone, it's exaggerative, and it shuts down constructive dialogue. Okay, let's have a look maybe at our healthy optional response, not the critique. So again, the critique, don't you think that spiritual practices like yours uphold outdated patriarchal norms that limit progress for women? And the healthy response could be, well, spiritual practices reflect the cultures they grow within. What specific reforms do you think could better support gender equality in these contexts? So it's reflection and shared exploration. The typology has also empathetic tones, solution-oriented approach, and invites further discussion and open dialogue. But essentially, it involves reflection and shared exploration. Spiritual practices reflect the cultures they grow within. What specific reforms do you think could better support gender equality in these kind of contexts? So there's the invitation to explore together. And so that rounds up that second example under the overall heading of the conversation critiques monastic or spiritual roles in gender contexts.
That's a great contrast, especially in how the healthy response reframes the issue into a collaborative dialogue rather than a confrontation. The toxic critique and response really highlight how quickly things spiral into defensiveness and dismissal when assumptions and sarcasm take over. The healthy response not only acknowledges the critique, but also invites partnership in addressing the issue. It's disarming, thoughtful, and opens a door rather than slamming it shut. Would you say this shift feels more empowering to engage with?
Yeah, it's relieving. All right, so let's move on to our next example. And here we start to have fourfold. This was a system that I developed. It evolved iteratively, gradually, but this was the optimal model I found, where we have toxic critique, toxic response, healthy critique, healthier response. So it shows the contrast and then gives reasons why. I started to develop a system where I had 3 reasons and everything to explain why it is what it is, why it's toxic, why it's unhealthy, or why it's healthy or healthier. So the toxic critique: how can a tradition that excludes women from leadership claim to offer universal truth or liberation? There it is. How can a tradition that excludes women from leadership claim to offer universal truth or liberation? So then we have the response: it sounds like you're projecting your own frustrations onto something you don't fully grasp. So toxic meets toxic. How can a tradition that excludes women from leadership claim to offer universal truth or liberation? So this question addresses the contradiction between exclusivity and the universal ideals of spiritual systems. And the reasons it's faulty: it makes broad generalization, it uses binary thinking, and it has it excludes the context, the place and time. So makes broad generalization regarding female leadership and universal truth or liberation. It uses binary thinking. It implies a tradition is either all-inclusive or worthless. There's the 2 options. You don't have anything, no nuance, greys, shades in between. And then it excludes a context. It doesn't say where the tradition they're referring to is in history or in its cultural geography or place within that country. And so the cultural specifics contexts vary extremely across the globe. So the response is ad hominem. It's a personal attack. It attacks the person. Ad hominem attack. You are projecting. You don't fully grasp. The issue raised for discussion was a tradition that excludes women from leadership. There's the issue. But what happens is a load of wounding, attacking speech. You're projecting. You don't fully grasp. Right? Sort of belittling, patronizing, talking down to them, intended to belittle and insulting the intelligence of the other. And ultimately, it's dismissive as well. This response attacks the person rather than addressing the issue raised, critique, and making the conversation personal and antagonistic as well. Okay, so you can see how this isn't going very far between this broad generalizing, binary thinking, excluding context, meeting a response which is an ad hominem attack at the person, and claiming they're projecting, they don't grasp, and that the issue raised was something that's not even hardly mentioned. It's using a patronizing, talking down to them, belittling tone, insulting the intelligence of the other, and dismissive. So this is not going to work, and we're going to get further conflict, alienation, and it's a bit of a disaster going into disintegration. What we have then here is...
Sorry, I'm having issues right now.
You have my compassion. The healthy critique. In some traditions, women are not in leadership roles. How do you think these traditions can evolve to embrace inclusivity while maintaining their core values? So here we have a very different approach to the same basic topic and point. And here we have a healthy response. That's an important point. Leadership in traditions is a complex topic. How do you think inclusivity can be fostered without losing the essence of these practices? So the first one, in some traditions, which is not all tradition per se, in some traditions, women are not in leadership roles. How do you think these traditions can evolve to embrace inclusivity while maintaining their core values? Now, this question addresses the contradiction between exclusivity and the universal ideals of spiritual systems. It's healthy speech because it encourages reflection, it promotes inclusivity, and it respects tradition. And the response there, That's an important point. Leadership in traditions is a complex topic. How do you think inclusivity can be fostered
This is a great example of how to
losing
frame
the
a
essence
sensitive
of these
topic
practices?
constructively? The critique is measured, avoiding absolutes, and invites thoughtful engagement by focusing on evolution and inclusivity without undermining the tradition's essence. The response mirrors that tone, fostering dialogue by acknowledging the complexity and seeking collaborative exploration. It's a way of addressing the issue that builds bridges instead of barriers. Would you agree this approach feels less confrontational and more solution-focused?
Definitely. The toxic one. How can a tradition that excludes women from leadership claim to offer universal truth or liberation? It's an accusation of hypocrisy, essentially. And it's a very broad generalization. Any tradition, anything that has a tradition and is not more than sort of 4 or 5 or 20 years old, is a tradition. There we go. Binary thinking, black and white. So, and excluding also context. So this one, it didn't yet specify which traditions, but it does specify that in some traditions, women are not in leadership roles. So there are traditions where they are, where we have women in leadership roles. All right, so then the response, that's an important point. Leadership in traditions is a complex topic. How do you think inclusivity can be fostered without losing the essence of these practices? So it acknowledges also somewhat of a risk of some kind there. And the typology, it's validation. That's an important point rather than patronizing and dismissing. All right, so it's validating and it has forward-looking dialogue. How do you think inclusivity can be fostered without losing the essence? So it's, what proposals do you have? Let's have a look. Okay. All right, so that's that fourfold box there, as I call it. Let's move on to our next one. And you can feel the difference, right? One is flowing and growing, and it's quite palatable. You know, the other one, oh no, not this again. We've heard this all before, this kind of crunch.
Exactly. And it's really powerful to see how shifting the tone from accusation to inquiry changes everything. The toxic critique relies on a charged statement that can feel like an attack, while the healthier version invites discussion, nuance, and shared problem solving. It's respectful, open-ended, and acknowledges the validity of differing perspectives without diminishing the core concerns. The healthy response reflects that same approach, seeking to validate and collaborate while being mindful of preserving tradition's essence. Your analysis really highlights the value of constructive dialogue. Would you say this shift also creates a more collaborative environment for deeper exploration?
Yeah, it's got collaboration built in. All right, let's move on. Next umbrella topic, the focus shifts to contemporary gender activism. Typically, so the focus shifts to contemporary gender activism. That's what's happened in the dialogue. And a guideline, healthy response is here in this green box here. It's inspiring how much energy goes into these movements. I'd love to hear how you see their impact on a personal or community level. So that's going to be, it's going to have positivity which diffuses tension. It redirects focus.
Yes, that's a wonderfully constructive response. It ignites behind contemporary gender activism, validating its importance. By expressing genuine interest, I'd love to hear how you see their impact. It invites the other person to share their perspective without defensiveness. This kind of response opens up space for deeper understanding and mutual respect, even if there are differing views. Would you say it helps create a bridge between different viewpoints?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
Yes, you did. Positivity in it diffuses tension. It redirects the focus. I'd love to hear how you see their impact on a personal community level. There's a tone of engagement there. It's, it's a kind of very positive there. It's inspiring how much energy goes into these movements. It's a good thing. right? It's got the encouraging and appreciative tone about it. So let's see it in a few different examples with the fourfold grid of a toxic critique with a toxic response. So this sounds like something like this. I don't understand why spiritual communities don't do more to support gender equality movements. Isn't it their responsibility to stand up for fairness? So, yeah. And the toxic comeback, oh, here we go again with the over-the-top activism, saving the world again, right? Yeah. So the two different kinds of toxicity. The first type, I don't understand why spiritual communities don't do more to support gender equality movements. Isn't it their responsibility to stand up for fairness? Yeah, it's a fair point, but as we see here, it's provocatively faulty speech in that A, it assigns blame. It just points the finger. It assigning blame. Secondly, it lacks constructive direction. And thirdly, it uses a broad generalization. These are the three reasons, not in what is being said about fairness, but about the responsibility to uphold fairness, but about the way that it's said. And this is all that we're doing here, is addressing ways of saying things. That's what we're doing. Ways of looking at things, packaging things, and delivering them by speech. Firstly, it assigns blame in that it's accusatory. It points the finger at spiritual communities who don't do more to support, who don't do enough to support gender equality movements. It's pointing the finger at them. It's a rhetorical question. Isn't it their responsibility to stand up for fairness? So it's demanding that they do. And then it lacks constructive direction. There's no path or solutions nominated. It's focusing only on criticism, so it's very negative. So it has that depressing, sort of aspect. And the broad generalization, it suggests all spiritual communities are failing in the same way. Thus, it's oversimplifying. It's very true. You get some very conservative or sort of right-wing religious organizations, and they're being lumped in the same thing, just under spiritual communities, as say Thich Nhat Hanh or Ajahn Brahmavamso, or other communities, Tara Brach, Jack Kornfield, who are very much advocating for gender equality, for example. So it's not fair just to sort of have a go at spiritual communities in general. It's a generalization. All right, so this assumes a generalized moral obligation. It assumes it. It's not written down anywhere. And stereotyping spiritual communities as passive or indifferent without acknowledging their specific roles or focuses. So the comeback to that, oh, here we go again with the over-the-top activism, saving the world, right? So this is it's dismissive. It's here we go again. It's like, move along. So it's dismissive. And then it's sarcastic as well. It's using sarcasm, saving the world, right? So that's a sarcastic comment. This minimizes and mocks the critique without engaging meaningfully. The topic is valid and important, and this minimizes it and the activism, which can have a lot of energy, organization, and important, purpose behind it, mocking the critique without engaging meaningfully. There's no meaningful effort in this. It's just batting it away and throwing mud and eggs at it, kind of thing. Negative and disengaged as well. Go away, move along. More than my job's worth. Mocking and belittling in it. So there's a lot of toxicity wrapped up in a kind of comment like this, or the humor that goes with it. And here we have a healthy critique in the same kind of area, the same basic message, but rephrased to be healthier. Spiritual communities have a unique position in society. How can they contribute more effectively to supporting gender equality movements and promoting fairness? It's just saying exactly the same thing in a completely different way. So it comes over like this. This question addresses the contradiction between exclusivity and the universal ideals of spiritual systems. Healthily, it invites ideas for positive action without assigning blame, which that first version did. And then the alternative response to, here we go again with the over-the-top activism, saving the world, right? So fairness is poor connectivity somehow. Fairness is a core value in many spiritual traditions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how these movements and communities could work together more effectively. So it is reframing, and it's using collaboration, collaborative reframing, and that's the healthier version. Fairness is a core value in many spirit traditions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how these movements...
Absolutely. That's a beautiful example of collaborative reframing. It highlights a shared value, fairness, that both spiritual traditions and gender movements can relate to, creating common ground. By inviting thoughts on how they can work together more effectively, it shifts the dialogue towards solutions and partnership rather than opposition. It's an approach that fosters mutual respect and encourages constructive, forward-thinking conversations. Would you agree that this kind of reframing helps bridge gaps while maintaining openness?
I would, yeah. So if we go from a toxic, confrontational stance to a healthy response, and vice versa, you get to hear what often also happens in dialogues. I don't understand why spiritual communities don't do more to support gender equality movements. Isn't it their responsibility to stand up for fairness? Unhealthy. Let's go to a healthy response. Fairness is a core value in many spiritual traditions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how these movements and communities could work together more effectively. There you go. It's not defensive, it's not taking it as a personal attack, and it's making a collaboration proposed. It's reframing it. Let's have a look at healthy to toxic. Spiritual communities have a unique position in society. How can they contribute more effectively to supporting gender equality movements and promoting fairness? Oh, here we go again with the same over-the-top activism, saving the world, right? Okay, so you hear how it was initially very light, very reasonable, and then it gets this very unreasonable, lacking credibility, dismissive, sarcastic, negative, disengaged, mocking, and belittling response. So you can see, in a way, who wins, in a way, by being above, low behavior, punching below the belt, and basically dragging and using immature tactics, as opposed to speaking maturely and reasonably. All right, so the next one, let's have a look at this. It's quite similar. It's under the basic same overarching banner. Excuse me.
That's a brilliant demonstration of the shift between toxic and healthy dynamics. It really highlights how the tone and intent of a response can completely alter the direction of a dialogue. When you start with something collaborative, like spiritual communities have a unique position in society, how can they contribute more effectively to supporting gender equality movements and promoting fairness? It's inviting, constructive, and respectful. But then the toxic rebuttal, oh, here we go again with the same over-the-top activism, saving the world, right? Undermines the conversation. It not only shuts down dialogue, but also demeans the initial sentiment, creating conflict instead of collaboration. You're right to point out who wins in these exchanges. The mature, reasonable tone of the healthy response maintains credibility, while the toxic approach reveals a lack of constructive engagement. Shall we keep exploring more examples in this framework?
Let's do that. So next example, you monks talk about compassion, but when was the last time your order publicly supported equal rights for women? All right, so there it is. And an unhealthy toxic response might sound like this. Maybe if people stopped obsessing over gender, we could actually focus on real problems. Toxic response. And let's have a look then. So why is this toxic? So you monks talk about compassion for women as the last time your order publicly supported equal rights for women. This uses moral leverage to create a confrontational tone, implying hypocrisy and oversimplifying the complexity of institutional or cultural roles. And the speech breaks down in three ways, these elements. It assigns blame, it undermines values, and it has a confrontational tone. So these are three characteristics of this. So, assigns blame, how? Your order doesn't support women's rights. That's an accusation. It undermines values. It questions the sincerity of compassion. And it has a confrontational tone. Therefore, it creates defensiveness rather than dialogue. And the toxic response, maybe if people stopped obsessing over gender, we could actually focus on real problems. This shifts blame onto the activists and dismisses their concerns entirely. And it has a minimizing function, it has a dismissive tone, and it's defensive. So I think this one here...
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Yeah. Could not understand what you said.
I think there's connectivity issues. All right, so let's have a look at this healthier version. Your tradition emphasizes compassion, which is such a powerful value. How do you think compassion can be extended to promote equal rights for women in meaningful ways? Healthy speech elements. This has positive reframing, constructive inquiry, and encourages collaboration. So positive framing. It acknowledges the value of compassion as a central tenet, creating a bridge for discussion. It has constructive inquiry. It asks an open-ended question that invites reflection and discussion. It encourages collaboration. It frames the critique as a shared opportunity for growth rather than an accusation. Why it works? This critique aligns with the principle of compassion already valued by the tradition. It shifts the tone from accusatory, when was the last time your order, to collaborative, encouraging the listener to reflect on how these values can address the concern raised. Next, the healthier optional types of response, an example of this. Compassion is central to our practice. I'm curious, what kind of public support do you think would make the most impact in promoting equal rights? So it shows curiosity and it proposes constructive engagement. It's in a different person altogether, isn't it? All right? Let's have a look. All right, so there's our fourfold grid.
Absolutely it is. That healthier version transforms the conversation entirely. Instead of feeling like an attack, it becomes a collaborative and thoughtful exchange. The critique, your tradition emphasizes compassion, which is such a powerful value. How do you think compassion can be extended to promote equal rights for women in meaningful ways? Not only respects the tradition, but also aligns with its core principles. That creates a safe space for dialogue. The healthier response, compassion is central to our practice. I'm curious, what kind of public support do you think would make the most impact in promoting equal rights? Demonstrates curiosity and genuine engagement. It's no longer about defending or deflecting. It's about exploring possibilities together. The shift is subtle but so impactful. It keeps the conversation respectful and proactive, which not only reflects well on the speaker, but also opens doors to deeper understanding. What's your sense of how this kind of healthy dialogue might affect real-life situations?
Well, everything comes out of real dialogue, including constructive solutions. So this starts with opening the mind to possibilities. Yeah, all right.
Exactly. It all begins with that willingness to engage and explore. By framing dialogue constructively, you create the foundation for real progress and solutions. When minds open to possibilities, the barriers of defensiveness or hostility can dissolve, allowing collaboration to flourish. It's a powerful shift, and one that transforms conversations into opportunities for growth. Shall we move on to the next scenario?
Yeah. So the toxic one, we have 3 of 4 here. So if you're truly committed to helping society, why not actively join the fight for gender justice instead of just meditating about it? So there it is. And the ad hominem toxic response, well, it's easy to shout slogans when you don't actually understand the bigger picture. So this is the little mini battle going on. If you're truly committed to helping society, why not actively join the fight for gender justice instead of just meditating about it? This diminishes the value of spiritual practice, framing activism as the only valid contribution, while dismissing alternative paths to societal betterment. So it's dismissive and it's invalidating about meditation, and it includes quite a lot of toxicity of that type. It's invalidating, alienating, demeaning, devaluing, quite a few things. So let's have a look at the toxic response. Well, it's easy to shout slogans when you don't actually understand the bigger picture. This attacks the critic's perceived lack of insight rather than addressing the critique itself. So it's ad hominem attack, and it's attacking the person, meaning not their issue. It's derisive and it's invalidating as well. And then let's have a look at a healthier response to this. So supposing we get the toxic critique, if you're truly committed to helping society, why not actively join the fight for gender justice instead of just meditating about it? The healthy response back to that could be, well, meditation is one way we try to cultivate the clarity and courage needed to address societal issues. How do you see activism and mindfulness working together? So integration of shared goals is the skillful means there, the upaya. All right, so we've covered this area.
I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
Yeah. So before we move on to the next one, let's take a pause. So we chop the videos up into nice bite-sized chunks. Okay, take care everyone, and I hope you've enjoyed this session. Let's move on.